Hello and welcome back to another episode of Business Law. Today we're going to be covering Chapter 12, which is titled UCC Risk of Loss and Contract Performance. So it should be a pretty good one today. We've got a couple a couple different topics to talk about. We'll talk about the identification, passage of titles, risk of loss, performance, and of course, like always, our key takeaways. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Awesome. So, identification. The UCC, this is a quote, by the way, the UCC has special provisions to determine who bears the risk of loss when goods are destroyed and the contract is silent about who bears the risk. Close quote. Just a quick little side note, UCC stands for Uniform Commercial Code, okay? So, that makes sense. So, let's talk about identification a little bit more. So, before ownership can pass from buyer to seller, goods must be identified and exist. I thought that was very interesting that the good must exist. And, of course, be identified. They must be identified to prevent loss from the buyer to the seller. When things are not identified, the UCC comes into action. Awesome. Let's go ahead and jump right into the passage of title. So, what do you think of when you hear passage of title? or think about passing title instead of passage of title.
Like when you buy a car from someone.
That's great. I think that directly applies. So something like that, but also in terms of like commercial goods. So the passage of title is typically chosen between both parties, but the UCC has clarified that the passage of title, or the title passes, upon delivery of goods. So unless specified, that's when the passage of title is. But this may depend on which delivery and how it's classified. So a shipment contract is able to be shipped via the U.S. Postal Service or other private companies.
Like Amazon or USPS.
Precisely. A destination contract is where the seller delivers the goods to a destination, more often than not, to the buyer themselves. With no shipment or destination, the buyer comes and picks it up. The title passes upon purchase and receipt, which is not a must-have, but, receipts are recommended for legal reasons and purposes. Awesome. Let's go ahead and talk about risk of loss. So the risk of loss is determined by the UCC in silent contracts. In free onboard shipping, the risk of loss is on the seller until delivery. So I think that applies to Amazon as well.
Mm-hmm.
If the location, this is a quote, if the location is the seller's location, i.e. the seller's city, the contract is a shipment contract. If the FOB location is the place to which goods are being shipped, i.e. the buyer's city, the contract is the destination contract, close quote. In a shipment contract, the buyer assumes the risk of loss when shipped to the carrier. A destination contract, the buyer assumes risk when the shipment is delivered to the specified place. So, porch pirates.
Yeah.
So, I guess that means that if we have a package out front, Amazon delivered it, they took a picture, uploaded it to us, and a porch pirate comes along, that wouldn't be on Amazon, that would be on us. Which is kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, this is a good time to clarify that the risk of loss does not mean that the party is liable for damage. Should you place goods within a carrier and they are damaged in transit, the carrier is going to bear responsibility and carry insurance to cover those claims. Risk of loss determines whether the buyer or seller will have to file the claim with the carrier. All right, let's talk about performance. Performance is when one buyer pays for the goods, and two, when a seller delivers the goods. If a seller breaches a contract, the buyer can seek redress by these four subjects. Number one, The right to inspect goods. This is done before the purchase and is designed to make sure the goods are up to the standard. Remember, that's upon breach of contract. The right to reject. The buyer has the right to reject if goods are delivered late, damaged, or wrong in a reasonable time. The buyer is not obligated to pay or entitled to, the buyer is not obligated to pay or they are entitled to a refund. Number 3, the right to revoke acceptance. Defects allow for revocation of acceptance. The textbook says, for example, if I were to purchase 500,000 toy boats and upon receipt check one to ensure it floats, and it does, I would reasonably accept them. However, if I later find out that 200,000 of the boats sink in the water, the UCC permits me to revoke my acceptance. Number 4, the rights to damages. This one is very interesting, and I had no idea about this. If the order cannot be completed, the buyer will be able to sue for damages. Damages being if the buyer needs to buy the product elsewhere for a higher price, they can sue that original person for the difference. So if I were to buy $17,300 worth of paper bags, but the seller can't get them to me on time, or it's wrong, and I have to go buy it for $18,000, I could sue for the difference of $7,000. It is, isn't it? Now let's go ahead and talk about the rights and duties of the seller. Number 1, the right to cure. If the goods were deemed unacceptable by the buyer, the seller can seek the right to cure if the defect is minor. The right to reclaim goods. If the buyer refuses to pay for or cannot pay for goods, then the seller can reclaim the goods. This is done, this has to be done in court if the product was delivered. There's no Mission Impossible heists, meaning like you can't sneak into their house and go steal or sneak onto their property and porch pirate it. So, number 3, the right to resell goods. Quite simply, if the buyer cannot buy the goods and the seller still has them, then the seller can sell the goods. Simple as that. And number 4, the rights to damages. Quite simply, as stated for the seller, if the goods are sold for less than the contract buyer offered, the seller can sue for the difference. So let's go ahead and talk about the key takeaways. I thought this chapter was very informative. As someone who buys, things online occasionally, it was interesting to hear where risk begins and ends for me, or for the seller. It was interesting to hear about the UCC and its duties to protect commerce. I really like the part about the seller being able to get back their goods and the suing for damages both ways. A connection I made with another class is my Math for the Real World class. We're learning about providing services through Excel, and it's interesting to hear about how the legal system works, or would it work with these rules and laws. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and till next time.